Good morning. My name is Alan Morgan. I'm a former State Superintendent of Public Instruction in New Mexico for 13 years and have the good fortune of working with the Building State Capacity and Productivity Center at WestAd. The Building State Capacity and Productivity Center is a federally funded initiative essentially designed to support and help state education agencies improve their work in teaching and learning. Today we have the honor of interviewing Joy Hofmeister. Superintendent Hofmeister is the elected State Superintendent of Public Instruction in the state of Oklahoma. Colleague state, we get to share a little bit of border together, and we share a lot of the challenges together between New Mexico and Oklahoma. Our purpose today is to talk about what is a series of landmark pieces of legislation. First, at the federal level, we're going to talk a little bit about how Oklahoma is addressing and going to address the forthcoming challenges and opportunities of the Every Student Succeeds Act. However, there's also been what I guess I would describe also as landmark legislation here in Oklahoma, several pieces which have now been signed into law by Governor Fallin and may hold some promise for not only the kind of reforms that Superintendent Hofmeister intends to bring about and has already started bringing about in Oklahoma, but also might serve as some bit of opportunity for other states if they take a look at what's been going on here in the Sooner State. So with that, Superintendent Hofmeister, thanks so much for joining us and being a part of this.
Great to be here.
Let's start with what what you consider kind of the key opportunities that this federal legislation will bring about for Oklahoma, and maybe some of the challenges that are coming with that. What's a lot of what used to be considered as federal mandate and responsibility has now been shifted to your office, your folks, the school systems, teachers, and others here in Oklahoma. What's kind of top on the list in terms of challenge and opportunity?
Well, there is a lot of opportunity. We have been asking for greater input at the state level. I believe those closest to students have the best hope of solving complex and lingering challenges, and it is a return away from a Washington D.C. more cookie-cutter approach to how we drive change to one that is more locally driven at the state level. And I want to use this opportunity to push that down to respecting the local voice of those closest to students truly, which are local school boards. But it's also about high accountability and providing the supports to achieve.
So I think about what you've said and how you've begun already to kind of put your imprimatur on the system here. Talk with us a little bit about how you were able to use your work with standards and really, I guess, what I would call standards reform here in Oklahoma. As I recall the timing, really even before ESSA became federal law. It was one of your first initiatives. You came in and said, we've got to do this differently, but we can't do it individually. We have to do it with all the stakeholders involved.
Yes.
And I'll get to a separate question in a moment about what you think your greatest strengths were on the communication side. But just talk with us about that process. What did you do to frankly bring about what is a new set of expectations for students and educators in Oklahoma?
Well, it was really trying to really strike a balance. First of all, we were leaving Common Core, which Oklahomans did not have confidence in for a whole variety of reasons, and that needed to happen. What we did was we began then with a desire to have high outcomes for students and really identify those standards that needed to be set in order to achieve that. So we looked at the highest performing states in math and English language arts, and we brought in those who were the architects for their process, interviewed them, spent a full day with a steering committee that was made up of people in higher ed, career tech, commerce as well as in the education communities throughout the state, each represented there. And we used that as a launching for a stakeholder-driven, with great expertise as the first focus, but a stakeholder-driven process. And so we got to work naming the writers of that, and modeled after the success of others. So we didn't start with a blank page. We began with what works, and we went from there, and we included parents, teachers, business leaders throughout the state, really listening to what was important to them, what they felt had been lacking, because without the buy-in and the voice of Oklahomans, we would be right back where we started. So it is truly, at the end of that process, a time where we can say we have Oklahoma standards written for Oklahoma, by Oklahoma, but with an eye on high achievement to lift education outcomes in our state. And that process also included legislators early on, so that when it was time for them to look at that final product, it wasn't the first time they'd seen it, and their constituents were saying, we were a part of this, we vetted it, we have confidence, and we're ready to go.
You mentioned this broad array of stakeholders that are out there, and everybody feels they have some ownership and should have a lot of say in how this goes, and of course they should. Sometimes certain bodies in the governmental process, like legislatures, to use an example, take a great deal of ownership of the process that's going to be used to not only create the standards, but specifically to evaluate or assess whether or not students have acquired that skills and knowledge that you've established in the standards. So you seem in Oklahoma to have established a pretty good working relationship. It is such that your new legislation, and again, take a few moments to kind of bring us up to speed on that, but it appears that there is a much more balanced plan going forward, where your office will have, as many of us believe, chief state school officers, in this case elected by the people, to provide oversight, guidance, leadership, and it's now much more back in your hands. How do you feel you have been able to accomplish this balance that may not be true in all states that we're dealing with as they deal with the implementation of ESSA?
Well, I think that the way we started was really trying to address a real culture change in the state, one that included many throughout the state who had high interest in making sure that we are lifting education outcomes. Everyone has their ideas of how to accomplish that, and I think it's very important that we not try to do something for our urban centers the same way we do them in our rural centers. Okay. We are a diverse state, and we are a rural state, but we also have some areas of urban and suburban concentration. And so it would be inappropriate for us to just make sweeping either legislative changes or policy changes without a real, genuine, authentic effort to draw out the kinds of input that is needed. Oftentimes, people wait for someone to come forward, and then you are driving policy based on just those who happen to be coming to the Capitol or coming to a state board meeting. That's the squeaky wheel in some circumstances. So it's very important, I think, as a leader to seek out input and to include people who might have not understood their part in giving their voice. I think business is a part of that. There are certain groups that have given that, but we have sought that at the local, rural level as well, with businesses on Main Street. What do you want? What do you need? What do you see that we could do in a better way? We started by building a network of advisory councils, about 20 of those, and that sounds unwieldy, but it was something that we dedicated a position in my cabinet to oversee and coordinate. And so that was part of how we've been able to build a real framework for then initiatives with, here is what we're thinking, And we would like to vet that plan through you. What are we missing? Poke holes in this. Shoot it down. Help us think through parts we haven't thought of in the past. And each of those advisory groups were built, and I'll give you one example. We have a minority demographic stakeholder group of those that represent students that are not served well historically, let's say in the Hispanic population, which is a growing sector in our state, growing demographic, and ask those questions. And number one, they've said we haven't been asked before. Number two, there are things I can't even think to ask. That I need to hear from them, but because we've taken the opportunity to set aside time and meet regularly, we are hearing and in a way then able to better serve and better represent the needs. And I think you also have to compose that group of people with a wide perspective of viewpoints. I like to bring people together who are on opposite ends. I think that's the most efficient way to get to the best solution. By doing that, we have a framework set that we were able to achieve with our standards, and now are going back to deal with new assessments, with a stakeholder advisory group, with then accountability with our new, we have A through F grading system, and then with graduation requirements as well. And then all of that will come through the department, through that input, and we will have board members participating out in the field, hearing that information as well, using our summer conferences and various training. Every chance we get, we will filter those points of contact and input there, and then bring that to the state board and then to the legislature before next session. So we've got a lot of work to do, but we started that with the standards, and that was a successful model, and we're gonna scale that to other efforts.
So you're frankly building on the success that you've achieved in this process that you designed and implemented to establish new and improved standards for the state of Oklahoma, extending that on to some other areas. So it strikes me that one of the areas where Oklahoma has some real prowess and something to say to others, which that is an alert that my next question is going to be, what advice would you give colleagues around the country, but at least with regard to how they are proceeding with implementing ESSA, building on the Oklahoma experience? We'll hold that for a second. Take just a minute or two. You have talked about the importance, throughout your remarks thus far today, you've talked about the importance of communication. Where does that fit in Joy Hofmeister's priority list, if you will? Talk with us about communication and its value to you.
I had an advantage of having been an appointed State Board of Education member, as well as someone who had been an educator, but also through the private sector in a business that was related to education as a supplement through parent engagement and through parent partnerships. So I had a different view than someone who grew up and professionally climbed through some of the leadership ranks in education through a superintendent's career ladder, let's say, or from my predecessor who really came also from a unique perspective as well. But I served under the previous administration as a board member. So what I saw was a recognition that reform doesn't happen just because we pass a law or adopt a policy. Reform happens when people engage and do the hard work of implementing. And implementing cannot happen without communications. And so in the battle for excellence in the classroom, our teachers are on the front lines, and our superintendents and school leaders are like battalion commanders in that army. And you've got to have trust with them, because I cannot affect meaningful improvement or changes in the classroom without that communication and without building a rapport and trust. And we're not always going to agree, but we are going to make certain we are meeting with those stakeholder groups very regularly, in fact monthly, so that we have that kind of understanding of what I'm trying to accomplish, and they can help me do that in a better way. And then, there's also that here's where we're not cutting it, folks, and we do that in private, and we do that where we can build together and stand shoulder to shoulder to really make meaningful change. And so as a board member, I saw the frustration on both sides, and I was able to see that the communication was key, and also the communication to the public, so that the public could understand what was happening in classrooms, and I would tell that story through the eyes of a teacher.
Okay.
And we have been, I think, pretty successful in keeping the momentum of public interest and focus on education in our state since I've been in office, and it's something that I think will be truly the key for getting great things done, because it is through that public opinion that we then are able to assist legislators in understanding the significance of a vote or an initiative, and then that also builds trust with them. Boy, I've learned a lot, and I have bruises to show for it. I've stepped in a mess before that I regretted, and I've had to really learn hard lesson not coming out of an elected path either. So I am very new to this, but I think then what I have to do is say, okay, let's turn that into some kind of strength, have fresh eyes on a situation, and then listen and develop a thick skin and be willing to admit mistakes. And so what I've had the great pleasure of doing is addressing Congress to talk about, we love our kids in Oklahoma, we love our kids in our states. We want to hold on for what we fought for, which was states' rights, and to be able to at the same time meet the needs of our students. And so I say, hold us accountable, but don't tell us how to do it, because we can do it in a way that best fits the needs of Oklahomans if the federal government will allow us that room, and I will jealously guard that.
Well said. So you are, you're kind of in the middle, if you will, of the group of chief state school officers now in the United States. In 2 years, you're
in 17 months. I have only been there 17 months, and now there's like a long list of
30,
people.
Probably 30 chiefs who
since I started.
Been there that are newer to the role. That said, as you've already suggested, you've learned a lot, you've felt a lot, you've aspired a lot, you have probably found yourself in why did I decide to do this, questioning at some point. What do you now say to those that are part of that, whether they're the new ones or not? You've got something to suggest or say, or perhaps counsel to give to other chief state school officers across the country as they face these same significant challenges. In a sentence or two, what can you share?
I think it's very important to continue to learn from others, as well as those in those in the state and those outside the state. I don't have a peer in the state, and so it is very important for me to learn from those who have a similar position in other states. Now, some of us are appointed, some are elected, some are appointed from a governor, others from a board, and I have seen a difference in how outspoken some are, how bold others are, how others really are working more collaboratively with a board to accomplish things. And so I can learn from them when I really need to work through the legislature on something that is more difficult or challenging for me in my set of circumstances. And I think that's key. I think the other thing is really to lean on what's already working. And if we can take from a model that's been successful in a state that's similar to your own, go visit, have a cup of coffee at a conference with that person. And I was able to bring back some ideas from other states to my stakeholder groups. And we also set up a red tape task force, which was an idea that I had heard when talking to another chief, a former chief. And I thought, wow, what a great idea. And you know what I didn't expect from that? I didn't expect that the red tape was all in my agency, and that what I thought was going to be, we're going to show the legislature all these unfunded mandates. Well, I'm not saying those aren't there, but we have plenty to do right now in clean house inside our own agency. But it took building that, and we did that with a 51-member committee. They put it together rapidly, and we had immediate, short-term, and long-term goals. And all three that were requiring legislative to change were passed and signed by the governor. We did the same with a teacher shortage task force in our state, where we still are under a tremendous teacher shortage. And the teacher shortage task force has met. They had 29 recommendations, a 91-member group, and they had 29 recommendations. 7 of those required legislation, and the governor signed all of those. So we were able to do that with a quick-paced, roll up your sleeves, get it done, and put a time limit on that, and then execute that. And we had a full-throated defense of why that was important, with all of those people standing behind me. So
that's great. That alone is a great suggestion for others who happen to be sharing this opportunity with us to learn more about from you, and how you've gone about basically reducing the, if you will, the red tape, the requirements sometimes that we in state education agencies don't even often realize, particularly at the chief's level, what kind of rules and regulations have been set up out there over history, and that somehow survive beyond individual personalities. So we've talked a little bit about these numerous issues related to both Oklahoma and the Every Student Succeeds Act. What did I not ask? What, as you were thinking about this conversation today, what would you have liked to have seen me inquire of you about that I failed to do so?
I think when I think about what's ahead of us, it is the rules for ESSA. And this is where I think as chiefs we have to be very vigilant to make certain that we do not give back what we fought very hard to achieve through our federal delegations that represent our states. And I am seeing that being encroached upon right now, and it's very important that we register our voice suggestions, that we take the rulemaking process very seriously and give that feedback. That's what I'm asking for at my state level and at local levels. I want to see local school districts do that more. I want to see teachers engage their parents at the classroom level more. I need to be doing that at the state level, and I encourage others to do the same, because as we stand together, we can get great things done. And I think that's something that we can do in every, classroom by classroom, state by state, but we represent a unique voice in our own states, and we have unique challenges. We can learn from others, but we cannot forget that it is within our own states we have the potential to really lift outcomes, be competitive, learn from comparability with assessments, but when it comes to accountability, let's make certain that we are writing those so that there are levers to drive the kinds of outcomes we need, and those are unique state by state. And so what I am needing to do here is going to be a little different from a state that maybe has had their same academic standards for the last 3 to 4 years. So those are things that I am looking forward to, the flexibility we will get. And so then my caution would be, you've got to have time to do it right. And I am concerned about the timeline right now.
Yeah, we're looking at implementation in a matter of a little over a year, and that's troublesome for any public official who's trying to manage a system the size and scope, and frankly the very important outcome being student learning at some point in this process. State Superintendent Joy Hofmeister, you have been a delight. Looking forward to seeing how this continues to roll out in Oklahoma. Very confident it's going to be a beginning of a great new era in public education in this state. So we appreciate you taking time to work with us and the Building State Capacity and
Thanks.
Productivity Center at West Ave. Thank you.